The living room of my Bergen County home was dead quiet, save for the soft tick of the grandfather clock in the corner. I stood by the hallway console table, staring at the empty leather presentation box. Inside it, just hours ago, had been 2 passes to the 2026 World Cup final at MetLife Stadium. $15,000 worth of VIP access given directly to me by the stadium's chief engineering director as a personal thank you for my 30 years of structural consulting. They weren't just tickets. They were a tribute to a lifetime of sweat, precision, and late nights spent ensuring those massive steel arches stood safe above 80,000 screaming fans. Now, the velvet lining was bare. Before I share what happened, please leave a comment below and let me know where you're watching from today. And if this is your first time here, welcome to the channel. I didn't have to guess who had taken them. My son Ryan walked through the front door 20 minutes later, tossing his Italian leather briefcase onto the sofa. He didn't look guilty. He looked energized, humming a tune as he poured himself a glass of ice water from the refrigerator. "Ryan," I said, my voice steady, keeping my hands resting flat against the dark oak table. "Where are the MetLife VIP passes?" Ryan paused, glass halfway to his mouth. He didn't flinch. He set the glass down with a soft click and turned to face me, adjusting the cuffs of his tailored suit jacket. "Dad, I took them. I'm taking Arthur Vance to the final on Sunday." Arthur Vance was the senior managing partner at Ryan's investment firm in Manhattan. For 6 months, Ryan had done nothing but talk about Vance, angling for a promotion to vice president of equity. "You took them without asking," I said, keeping my tone level, deliberate. "Those were issued in my name, Ryan. They were a gift from the engineering board." Ryan let out a short, dismissive breath, shaking his head as if he were explaining basic arithmetic to a toddler. "Dad, come on. Be realistic for once. You're 68 years old. You sit in your armchair every weekend watching the matches on a 60-inch screen with a cold beer. You don't need to be down in a high-noise VIP suite surrounded by corporate executives. You wouldn't even enjoy it." I looked at my 34-year-old son, the boy I had raised alone after my wife Clara passed away 15 years ago, the boy whose college tuition I paid in full and whose mortgage I had quietly backed when his credit fell short. "It's a world-class final, Ryan. Argentina against Spain. And those passes were given to me. And they're worth 15 grand on the secondary market if they were sellable," Ryan interrupted, stepping closer, his voice dropping into that slick, persuasive tone he used on clients. "But giving them to Arthur? That's worth $250,000 salary bump for me. It's an investment in the family future. I told Arthur my contact at the stadium secured them for us. He's thrilled. We're sitting in row A of the skybox." "You lied to your boss and you stole from your father." Ryan's face hardened. The polite polish vanished, replaced by an edge of sharp annoyance. "Stole? Dad, I live in a $900,000 house in Ridgewood because I work 80 hours a week trying to build something. You're living off a pension and legacy savings. What were you going to do with those passes? Show off to your retired mechanic buddies? You're too old to care about 90 minutes of soccer. Let people who actually have a career to build use the opportunity." He picked up his briefcase, turning toward the door. "I'll drop by next week after the match. Don't make a big deal out of this, Dad. It's just seats." The front door clicked shut. The house returned to silence. I didn't yell. I didn't throw anything. As a structural engineer, I've spent 40 years learning one fundamental truth. When a load-bearing structure begins to crack under stress, screaming at the steel doesn't fix the tension. You simply examine the blueprints, locate the anchor point, and enforce the original design. I walked back to my study, opened the second drawer of my desk, and pulled out a thick black leather-bound binder labeled Ridgewood Property Guarantee Agreement. 3 years ago, when Ryan wanted to buy his suburban home to impress his wealthy fiancée and her family, the bank refused his loan due to his high debt-to-income ratio. I stepped in as the primary guarantor, putting up my personal investment portfolio as collateral so the bank would approve his $450,000 primary mortgage. I flipped past the payment schedules to page 8. Section 4. Guarantor Authority and Conduct Covenants. It was a standard, rigorous clause my family attorney had insisted on inserting before I signed my name to my son's debt. It stated plainly that if the primary borrower engaged in fraudulent asset misrepresentation moral compromise affecting the guarantor's financial reputation, or unauthorized transfer of guaranteed assets. The guarantor retained the absolute right to unilaterally withdraw financial backing upon formal notice. Without a guarantor, the full loan balance would become immediately callable by the lender within 30 business days or face immediate restructuring. I picked up my desk phone and dialed a familiar number. Bill Garrett answered on the third ring. "George? It's almost 7 on a Thursday. Everything all right?" "Bill," I said, my voice calm, cold, and clear as ice. "I need you to pull up the Ridgewood mortgage file from 3 years ago, the one with Section 4. There was a brief pause on the line, the rustle of paper, and then Bill's tone shifted. "I'm listening, George. What happened?" "Ryan just took my MetLife VIP passes for his boss," I said quietly, "and he reminded me that I'm just an old man sitting in an armchair." Bill took a slow breath. "Section 4 requires formal written notice of covenant breach to both the bank and the stadium authority, George. Once I file that audit notice, the bank's compliance department gets flagged automatically. There's no pulling it back once the machinery starts." I looked out the window toward the quiet suburban street. "File it, Bill, first thing tomorrow morning." By 8 o'clock Friday morning, I was sitting in Bill Garrett's office on Main Street, watching his assistant stamp 3 copies of a formal legal notice. Bill leaned back in his leather chair, holding a steaming mug of black coffee. "The notice of covenant breach under Section 4 has been transmitted to First National Bank's Compliance Division," he said, his voice measured. "Because you are the sole guarantor on Ryan's loan, the moment they verify your signature and the breach documentation, his mortgage guarantee is officially flagged. The bank's credit committee will meet on Monday morning to issue a formal 24-hour cure demand or initiate loan acceleration." "What about the stadium?" I asked. Bill pulled a second document from a blue folder. "I personally spoke with Mark Callahan, the head of event security operations for MetLife Stadium. Mark remembers you from the 2018 structural overhaul. When I explained that the 2 VIP credentials registered under your name had been taken without authorization, he logged the serial numbers directly into the FIFA event control system. As of 20 minutes ago, those 2 passes are flagged for manual verification at Gate A. Will they be stopped at the entrance?" "Mark said they let credential holders pass through the main outer perimeter," Bill explained, setting his coffee down. "Their system flags the electronic badges when they are scanned at the entrance to the corporate suites. Whoever tries to scan those passes will be directed to security for identity confirmation. If your name isn't on the face that shows up, the passes are confiscated instantly." I nodded slowly. "Good." "George," Bill said, looking at me over the rim of his glasses, "Ryan is your only son. Once Mark's team revokes those passes in front of Arthur Vance, and once the bank calls that $450,000 mortgage, Ryan standing at his firm is going to disintegrate. Are you entirely sure you want to go through with this?" I looked at the framed photograph on Bill's wall. A shot of the stadium's steel skeleton during construction, a project I spent 3 years of my life perfecting. "Bill, 3 years ago I put up my life savings so Ryan could buy a home he couldn't afford. Last night, he took the one token of appreciation I earned from 30 years of work, handed it to his boss, and told me I was too old to matter. I'm not destroying his life. I'm simply removing my foundation from under it." While I sat in Bill's office, Ryan was 30 miles away in Manhattan, completely oblivious to the machinery that had just been set in motion. Later that afternoon, my daughter-in-law's sister called me, asking if I had seen Ryan's latest post on professional networking sites. I opened my computer and pulled up his profile. Ryan had posted a crisp, high-resolution photo of the 2 VIP passes sitting on his mahogany desk in Wall Street, accompanied by a lengthy caption boasting about securing exclusive access to the World Cup final for senior executive leadership. Dozens of his colleagues had already commented, congratulating him on his initiative and connections. He was celebrating a house built on borrowed sand, unaware that the tide was coming in. At 5 o'clock on Saturday afternoon, 24 hours before kickoff, I sat on my front porch with a cup of tea. My phone buzzed on the small wooden table beside me. It was Ryan. I answered on the second ring. "Hello, Ryan." "Hey, Dad," he said, his voice brisk, background noise echoing from what sounded like a crowded steakhouse in Midtown. Just calling to make sure you're not still sulking about the tickets. I'm not sulking, Ryan, I said calmly. I'm giving you one last chance to bring those passes back to this house. You have until 8 o'clock tonight. Ryan let out a harsh, incredulous laugh. Dad, give it a rest. I'm at dinner with Arthur Vance and his wife right now. I already handed him his credential. He was thrilled. He's talking about putting me in charge of the regional tech fund next quarter. Do you have any idea what that means for me? It means you built a promise on something that isn't yours, I replied softly. They're just tickets, Dad, Ryan snapped, dropping his voice to a hushed whisper so his boss wouldn't hear. You're acting like I stole your pension. You're sitting in Bergen County doing nothing. Let me use this to advance my career. I'll buy you a nice dinner next week to make up for it. Now stop calling me about this. The line went dead. I set the phone down on the table, picked up my tea, and took a slow sip. The evening air was cool, carrying the faint sound of distant highway traffic heading toward the meadowlands where MetLife Stadium stood illuminated under the evening sky. Ryan had made his decision. He had looked at his father, looked at the sacrifice that built his comfort, and decided it was nothing more than leverage to be traded for a corner office. He believed I was passive because I was quiet. He believed that because I had spent 30 years serving my family without complaint, I had forgotten how to set a boundary. He was about to learn that the quietest structures are often the ones engineered to withstand the heaviest storms. Sunday afternoon arrived with the kind of electric humidity that hangs over northern New Jersey in mid-July. By 4 o'clock, MetLife Stadium was surrounded by a sea of 80,000 fans, blue and white jerseys mixing with Spanish red under the massive LED floodlights. I sat in my quiet study in Bergen County, the air conditioning humming softly in the background. On the desk in front of me sat a tablet playing the live broadcast, alongside a fresh cup of black coffee and the original stamped copy of Section 4 from Bill Garrett's office. I wasn't angry. I felt the singular, unyielding focus of a man watching a heavy mechanical lever drop into place. Over in the east corporate tower of the stadium, Ryan was escorting Arthur Vance and his wife up the carpeted ramp toward the private suite level. Ryan walked with his head high, adjusting his silver tie every few minutes, holding the broad leather-bound VIP lanyard proudly against his chest. I have to hand it to you, Ryan, Vance said, clapping him on the shoulder as they approached the glass double doors of the skybox suite. Getting credentials for the World Cup final on 3 days' notice is no small feat. The board is going to be very impressed with your initiative when we review the third-quarter leadership assignments. It's all about leverage and knowing who to talk to, Arthur, Ryan said, beaming with a smooth, effortless smile. When you operate at a high level, doors just open. They reached the private entrance to Skybox 14. A tall, uniformed attendant stood behind a polished granite podium, holding a handheld optical scanner. Good afternoon, gentlemen, the attendant said politely. Credentials, please. Arthur Vance presented his pass first. The scanner emitted a soft green beep. Welcome, Mr. Vance. Enjoy the match. Ryan stepped forward, holding out his VIP credential with a practiced flourish. Ryan Henderson, guest of honor. The attendant raised the scanner and passed the red laser beam over the encrypted barcode on the back of Ryan's card. Instead of a chime, the handheld unit emitted a loud, sharp double beep, flashing a bright red icon across its screen. Flagged, invalid authorization. The attendant frowned slightly, wiping the lens of the scanner with his thumb. Hold on just a moment, sir. Let me try that again. He scanned the code a second time. The red light flashed again, accompanied by a low warning tone from the podium console. Ryan's smile stiffened, though his voice retained its arrogant edge. Check it again. There's obviously a glitch in your system. That pass came directly from stadium engineering leadership. Sir, the system is showing a security hold, the attendant replied calmly, reaching for a black radio on his hip. Please step to the side for just a moment. This is ridiculous, Ryan snapped, glancing nervously at Arthur Vance, who had stopped 3 paces ahead and was now watching with a quiet, sharp fold in his brow. I don't have time for equipment failures. Call your manager. 2 minutes later, heavy footsteps echoed down the tiled corridor. Mark Callahan, the stadium's director of event security, approached the podium accompanied by 2 uniformed New Jersey state troopers. Mark wore a dark navy suit with an official FIFA operational pin on his lapel. "Is there a problem here, Mark?" Arthur Vance asked, stepping forward, recognizing the security chief from previous corporate events. Mark looked at Vance, then turned his gaze directly to Ryan. "Arthur, good to see you. But we have an issue with this credential." He pointed to the pass hanging around Ryan's neck. "This is a restricted honorific pass issued specifically to retired structural senior engineer George Henderson. As of 6:30 Friday morning, this credential was registered as stolen and unauthorized by Mr. Henderson himself." The hallway went dead silent. Ryan's face turned from flushed red to a pale, ghostly white. That's a misunderstanding. George Henderson is my father. He gave these to me." Mark pulled a laminated digital printout from his inner suit pocket. "Your father filed a formal revocation notice through his legal counsel, backed by the venue authority. The terms of this credential state clearly that it is non-transferable under any circumstances without the express written signature of George Henderson. Do you have a signed transfer authorization from your father, sir?" Ryan's mouth opened, but no sound came out. He didn't give me a written." "Then you are holding a revoked, flagged credential inside a secure corporate zone," Mark said, his voice flat, professional, and entirely devoid of emotion. "Hand over the pass, please." Arthur Vance stepped back, his eyes narrowing as he looked at Ryan. The warmth in his voice was completely gone, replaced by a cold, sharp disgust. "Ryan, did you steal your father's tickets to bring me to this game?" "Arthur, no. Listen to me. He's an old man. He wasn't even going to use them. I did this for the firm. I did this for our team." "You lied to me," Vance interrupted, his voice dropping into a harsh, icy whisper that cut through the noise of the stadium crowd outside. "You told me your contacts in stadium management gave you these as a personal courtesy. You brought me to a championship match on a stolen pass." "Arthur, please." "Don't speak to me," Vance said, turning away. "We'll discuss your position with the firm first thing Monday morning." Mark Callahan gestured to the two troopers. "Gentlemen, please escort this individual out of the venue." One of the troopers stepped forward, unhooked the VIP lanyard from Ryan's neck, and placed a firm hand under Ryan's elbow. Before 80,000 fans began singing in the stands for the start of extra time, Ryan Henderson was walked briskly down the main concourse, past thousands of spectators, and pushed through the turnstiles out into the muggy evening air of the parking lot. Back in Bergen County, I watched the television broadcast as the screen cut to a wide shot of MetLife Stadium lit up against the New Jersey night sky. My tablet buzzed on the desk. It was a text from Mark Callahan. "Credentials secured, subject escorted off premises." I set my coffee cup down, looked at the clock on the wall, and picked up my pen to sign the formal notice for First National Bank. The first lever had dropped. Now came the structure. By 9 o'clock Monday morning, I was sitting at my kitchen table with a mug of fresh coffee, watching the morning light stream through the blinds. On the table rested two documents: the signed receipt from First National Bank confirming the delivery of the Section 4 Covenant Enforcement Notice, and an official letter from MetLife Stadium's Venue Operations Board detailing the formal revocation of the VIP passes. 30 miles away in Manhattan, Ryan's world was collapsing in precise mathematical order. At 9:15, the compliance director at First National Bank formally acted on the Section 4 breach notice. Because I had withdrawn my signature as primary guarantor, the bank's legal framework triggered an immediate loan acceleration protocol. A $450,000 mortgage balance was officially called due in full, giving Ryan 30 calendar days to refinance the debt entirely on his own income, an impossible feat given his financial metrics, or face immediate foreclosure proceedings on his Ridgewood home. 10 minutes later, Ryan was summoned into Arthur Vance's corner office on the 42nd floor. The meeting lasted less than 6 minutes. Vance didn't raise his voice. He simply informed Ryan that a senior executive who attempts to bribe leadership using stolen family assets demonstrated a fundamental failure of integrity. By 10 o'clock, Ryan was handed a cardboard box with his personal desk items and escorted to the street by corporate security, his corporate email deactivated and his path to vice president permanently severed. At 11:30, my front doorbell rang. I didn't rush to answer it. I stood up slowly, walked to the hallway, and opened the door. Ryan stood on my porch, looking like a man who had been caught in a landslide. His tie was loosened, his hair unkempt, and his eyes bloodshot with frantic, desperate exhaustion. He held his phone in one hand and his suit jacket draped messily over his arm. "Dad," he breathed, his voice cracking as he stepped forward. "Dad! What did you do? My bank called me an hour ago. They're accelerating the entire mortgage. And Arthur fired me, Dad. He marched me out of the building." I stepped back, leaving the door wide open. "Come inside, Ryan!" He stormed into the living room, pacing back and forth across the hardwood floor like a caged animal. "You called the stadium security. You filed a legal notice with my lender. Dad, I'm your son. How could you do this to me over a pair of soccer tickets? You're destroying my life." I walked over to my armchair, the same armchair he had mocked 4 days earlier, and sat down calmly. I looked up at him, my voice flat, steady, and entirely free of malice. "I didn't destroy your life, Ryan," I said softly. "You built a life on my credit, my hard work, and my silence, and then you decided I was obsolete. You took the one token of respect I earned from 30 years of structural labor, handed it to your boss, and told me to my face that I was too old to matter." Ryan stopped pacing. He stared at me, his chest heaving, trying to find words. "It was an opportunity, Dad. I was trying to get ahead. You could have just let it go." "A structure cannot stand when its foundation is removed, Ryan," I said, leaning forward slightly. "You believed that because I stayed quiet, I was passive. You believed that my generosity was weakness and that my support was something you were entitled to demand. But a guarantee is a contract of trust. When you broke the trust, you removed the guarantee." "I have 30 days, Dad," Ryan shouted, his eyes welling with furious tears. 30 days before the bank takes the house. Are you really going to let them foreclose? Are you going to sit here and watch me lose everything?" "You won't lose everything unless you choose to," I replied calmly. "You have a college degree that I paid for. You have a car. You have skills. Sell the house. Pay off the principal. Move into a 2-bedroom apartment and start building something that actually belongs to you. But my money, my credit, and my name are no longer available to back your vanity." Ryan stared at me for a long, heavy moment. For the first time in his adult life, he realized there was no negotiation, no clever excuse, and no emotional manipulation that would alter the boundary. The quiet old man in the armchair was no longer absorbing the weight. He picked up his jacket from the sofa, his shoulders slouched, and walked toward the hallway. Before he reached the front door, he paused and looked back at me, his voice barely a whisper. "You really meant it." "A contract isn't built for sunny days, Ryan," I said, repeating the words Bill Garrett had spoken to me years ago. "It's built for when the storm rolls in. I spent 30 years protecting you from the storm. Now you have to learn how to stand in it." The front door closed softly behind him. An hour later, Bill Garrett arrived at my house with a final stack of documents. We sat at the dining table, and I executed the transfer papers directing the released guarantee funds and my personal investment equity into a perpetual trust. The earnings from that trust will now fund annual engineering scholarships for working-class students at the local community college, students who understand the value of honest labor and hard work. I walked out onto my back porch with a warm cup of coffee. The sun was high over Bergen County, illuminating the green trees and the quiet neighborhood streets. In the distance, beyond the horizon, MetLife Stadium stood quiet after the championship match, its massive steel arches resting securely on the foundations I helped build decades ago. Some people think being quiet means you're weak. They think patience means you're willing to be pushed forever. But the strongest structures in this world aren't the ones that make the most noise. They're the ones built with precise boundaries. Anchored deep in the ground, engineered to hold firm no matter how hard the wind blows. If a member of your own family took your hard-earned respect and traded it for their own personal gain, would you keep quiet to save the peace, or would you enforce the boundary? Let me know in the comments below.